14. Lyra was all sharp angles and quiet observation, her eyes a startling shade of jade green that held the wisdom of the ancient woods she called home. Her father, Alden, was a mountain of a man, his laughter a low rumble that could shake the very timbers of their cottage. His wolf form was a magnificent brown beast, powerful and sure-footed. He taught her how to read the forest, to follow the faintest of scents on the breeze, to know the difference between the track of a deer and that of a rogue. "Smell that, little wolf," he would murmur, his voice a gentle rasp. "Rain is coming, and something else, something wild." Her mother, Mira, was the heart of their small family. Her touch was soft, her songs a low, melodic hum that promised safety. Her wolf, a creature of pure white fur, was as swift and graceful as the winter wind. It was from Mira that Lyra learned the stories of the moon goddess, of the sacred bond between mates, and of the wild, free spirit that lived within each of them, a spirit Lyra yearned to meet. Her own shift was close. She could feel it humming just beneath her skin, a low thrum of energy that made her restless. She dreamed of running with her parents under the full moon, her paws silent on the forest floor, part of their small, perfect pack. But fate, a cruel and indifferent force, had other plans. The storm broke on a moonless night, the rain lashing against their windows in a furious torrent. It wasn't the rain that woke her, but a sound that didn't belong, a low, guttural snarl that cut through the howl of the wind. Rogues. Alden was already moving, his human form shedding away in a seamless, practiced ripple of muscle and bone. In his place stood the great brown wolf, its lips curled back to reveal formidable teeth. Mira was right behind him, a flash of white in the dim light, her own transformation a breathtaking, silent dance. A desperate, primal urge surged through Lyra. Now, I have to shift now. I have to help them. She closed her eyes, focusing on the energy coiled in her gut, pleading with the wolf inside to emerge. A searing, agonizing pain ripped through her. It was not the clean, transformative fire her parents had described. It was a brutal tearing, a grinding of bones that refused to settle, a fire that burned without purpose. Her vision swam with black spots, a scream trapped in her throat. The shift stalled, caught halfway between girl and beast, a state of unbearable torment through the haze of her agony. She saw her father leap through the splintered doorway, a roar of defiance tearing from his throat. She saw her mother follow, a white streak against the dark maw of the forest. The sounds of the fight were a symphony of horror snarls, yelps of pain, the sickening crunch of bone. Lyra collapsed onto the floor, the failed transformation receding, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache where the wolf's fire should have been. Her mother's last words to her, spoken just that morning, echoed in her mind. No matter what happens, Lyra, you survive. That is your promise to me. You live. Curled in the darkest corner of the cottage, shivering, she made that promise again, a silent, desperate vow. I will survive. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in pale, watery shades of gray and pink, the forest was silent, too silent. Lyra forced herself to her feet. The cottage was a wreck, the door hanging from a single hinge outside. The rain-soaked ground was a canvas of mud and blood. She found them near the great oak tree, their human forms returned to them in death, their bodies still and broken. A sob tore from her, a raw, wounded sound that was swallowed by the indifferent trees. For 3 days, she wandered the forest, a ghost haunting the edges of her own shattered life. Hunger was a dull ache, but grief was a razor-sharp blade in her heart. On the 3rd day, her legs finally gave out. She collapsed at the edge of the woods, the imposing stone walls of the Eldridge Pack's fortress looming in the distance like a grim monument. That was where Greta found her. The Pack's head cook was a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and kind, weary eyes. She knelt beside the mud-caked, half-starved girl, her nose twitching. She smelled the faint, heartbreaking scent of a wolf who had lost its pack, and something more. A muted, broken scent. A wolf that couldn't answer the call. "Oh, you poor thing," Greta murmured, her voice thick with compassion. She saw the jade-green eyes, wide with a terror so profound it stole her breath. Without another word, she gathered the frail girl into her strong arms and carried her toward the warmth and safety of the castle kitchens. She gave Alara a bowl of thick, hearty stew that tasted of life itself. As Alara devoured it, Greta spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "You don't talk about what you are. You hear me. You don't talk about your wolf. A shifter who can't shift. They're seen as broken, worthless. You keep your head down, you work hard, and you become invisible. It's the only way you'll survive here." And so, Alara's new life began, a life of shadows and silence. In the heart of the Eldridge pack, she scrubbed floors, peeled vegetables, and learned to move so quietly that she was often forgotten. She became a ghost, her spirit walled off, her wolf locked away in a prison of trauma and pain. She was surviving, just as she had promised. Chapter 2. The Arrival of the Consort. 6 years passed. The sharp angles of childhood softened into the gentle curves of a young woman, but Alara, now 20, remained a creature of the shadows. Her existence was a quiet rhythm of chores, the scent of baking bread and roasting meat her constant companion. From the kitchens, she watched the life of the Eldridge pack unfold. She watched their alpha, Thorn. He was a leader born, not just made, tall and broad-shouldered. He moved with an effortless, predatory grace that commanded respect. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, his jawline sharp and dusted with a neatly trimmed beard. But it was his eyes that held everyone captive. They were the color of a stormy sky, a deep, impenetrable gray that saw everything. He was strong, respected, and utterly alone. Alara could see it. In the rare moments he thought no one was watching, a profound loneliness that seemed to cling to him like a shroud. Then came the announcement of his political marriage. He was to wed Seraphina, the daughter of the powerful Alpha Elias from the neighboring Shadow Vale pack. The union was for trade routes and mutual defense, a strategic alliance that had nothing to do with the heart. Seraphina's arrival was not a quiet affair. She swept into the Eldridge fortress like a blizzard, all glittering beauty and icy disdain. Her hair was a cascade of spun gold, her eyes the brilliant, cold blue of a winter sky. She was breathtakingly beautiful, and she knew it. The pack was in awe of her. But Alara, from her invisible corner of the world, saw something else. She saw the flash of cruelty in those blue eyes when a servant was too slow, the sharp, dismissive curl of her lip when she spoke to the castle staff. The day their worlds collided was mundane, ordinary. Thorn had just returned from a long patrol along the borders, his clothes spattered with mud, his face weary. He strode into the kitchens, a rare occurrence, seeking nothing more than a glass of water. The room fell silent, the staff frozen in a mixture of fear and reverence. Alara was by the hearth, stirring a large pot of soup. She didn't cower. She simply looked up, her movements unhurried, for a fleeting 3 seconds. His storm-gray eyes met her jade-green ones. There was no recognition, no spark of destiny. It was just a glance, a moment of stillness in the bustling kitchen. But in that brief connection, he saw her, not a servant, not a ghost, but a person. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod before turning to get his water. It was nothing. It was everything. Because Seraphina was standing in the doorway, she had seen the glance. She had seen the way the Alpha's gaze had lingered, for just a moment. On the silent, unassuming kitchen maid, a flicker of possessive, irrational jealousy ignited in her cold blue eyes. Later that day, A summons came. Lyra was to leave the kitchens. She had been chosen by the Alpha's new consort to be her personal handmaiden. Greta's face went pale. "No," she whispered, grabbing Alara's arm. "She saw him look at you. This is a punishment. Child, don't go." But to refuse was impossible. It would mean death or banishment. With a heavy heart and a growing sense of dread, Alara left the warm, comforting sanctuary of the kitchens and walked toward the gilded cage of Seraphina's chambers. She was no longer invisible. She had been seen, and she was about to pay the price. Chapter 3. The First Scars. Life as Seraphina's handmaiden was a lesson in silent suffering. The tasks themselves were simple: brushing the long, golden fall of Seraphina's hair, laying out her lavish gowns, drawing her scented baths. But each task was a minefield, each moment a test of Alara's composure. Seraphina's cruelty began as a slow, insidious poison, a pinch on the arm, hard enough to leave a blooming purple bruise, for a perceived hesitation, a sharp slap across the face, the sting lingering for hours, for a wrinkle in a dress. The verbal barbs were constant, a stream of venom designed to chip away at Alara's soul. Useless, clumsy, pathetic, broken thing. Alara absorbed it all, her face a blank mask, her promise to her mother a shield around her heart. Survive. The first true act of premeditated cruelty happened on a cold, rain-swept afternoon. Thorn was away, meeting with the pack elders. The castle was quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. Seraphina was sitting before her vanity, her reflection staring back with cold dissatisfaction. "You pulled my hair," she hissed, her voice dangerously low. "I'm sorry." "My lady," Alara whispered, her hands stilling. "I was gentle." "Don't lie to me." Seraphina's eyes narrowed, locking on the small fire poker resting in the hearth, its tip glowing a dull orange from the embers. She rose with a chilling, deliberate grace and picked it up. "You need to learn a lesson about causing me pain, little servant," she said, her voice a cruel purr. She advanced on Alara, who was frozen in place, her mind screaming for her to run, her body refusing to obey. "Give me your hand." Alara's breath hitched. She couldn't. She wouldn't. But defiance was a luxury she couldn't afford. Slowly, trembling, she extended her left hand, palm up. Seraphina smiled, a chillingly beautiful and terrible sight. She pressed the hot tip of the poker into the soft flesh of Alara's forearm. The pain was immediate, a blinding, white-hot agony. The smell of her own flesh searing filled the air, acrid and sickening. A scream built in her chest, but she choked it down, biting her tongue so hard she tasted blood. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. To scream would be to give Seraphina the satisfaction she craved. Deep inside her, in the cold, locked-away place where her wolf slept, something stirred. A low, desperate growl of pure fury echoed in the hollows of her soul, a beast raging against its cage, helpless to protect its other half. Seraphina pulled the poker away, leaving a weeping, angry red burn in its wake. She looked at Alara's tear-streaked but silent face, her own expression a mixture of fascination and frustration. "So defiant," she murmured, dropping the poker with a clatter. "We'll have to work on that." That night, Alara crept back to the kitchens. Greta saw the makeshift bandage on her arm and her heart broke. She gently unwrapped it, her face a mask of sorrow and rage as she treated the wound with a soothing salve. "You have to tell someone," Greta pleaded, her voice a ragged whisper. "You have to tell the Alpha." Alara shook her head, the movement sharp. "And say what?" "That his new consort, the daughter of a powerful ally, is a monster who would believe me. They would call me a liar, a jealous servant. It would be my death." She looked at Greta, her jade eyes filled with a grim, weary resolve. "I will survive this. I just have to be smarter, quieter." Greta could only nod, her own eyes filling with helpless tears. From that day on, Alara learned to hide. She wore long sleeves, even in the heat of summer. She mastered the art of becoming a piece of furniture, a silent presence that fulfilled her duties without drawing attention. She learned to read Seraphina's moods, the subtle shift in her eyes or the tightening of her jaw that signaled an impending storm of cruelty. But the burn on her arm was a permanent reminder. It was the first of many scars, a map of silent agony etched onto her skin. Chapter 4: Years of Torment. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into nearly 5 years of unrelenting, secret torment. Seraphina's cruelty became a dark art form, her methods growing more varied and sadistic. She never marked Alara's face or any other visible part of her body. Her canvas was the flesh hidden beneath the simple servant's dress. There were the thin, stinging lines from a riding crop for spilling a single drop of wine. There were the small, circular burns from the hot wax of a candle, dripped onto her back for failing to arrange Seraphina's jewels to her satisfaction. There were the shallow, precise cuts from a small silver letter opener, dragged across her ribs when Seraphina was simply bored. Alara's body became a secret history of pain, a map of scars. As she thought of it, each mark told a story of survival, of a scream swallowed, of a promise kept. The isolation was a torment of its own. The other servants learned to keep their distance. They saw the shadows under Alara's eyes, the way she flinched from sudden movements, but they were too afraid to intervene. Seraphina's power was absolute. One young maid, Lyra, a girl with a kind heart and a naive sense of justice, tried to help. She saw Alara stumbling in the hallway one evening, fresh from a session with Seraphina, and offered her a piece of bread and a whispered word of comfort. 2 days later, Lyra was gone. The official story was that she had run away, stolen some silver, but Alara knew the truth. She saw the flicker of triumph in Seraphina's eyes and felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Lyra had paid the price for her kindness. Greta, too, learned the cost of intervention. She had tried to speak to one of the older, more compassionate guards, a man named Fendrel, hinting at the consort's temper. The next week, Fendrel was reassigned to a dangerous outpost on the northern border, a place from which few returned. The message was clear. Seraphina's domain was her own, and no one was to interfere. Through it all, Alara felt the desperate stirring of her dormant wolf. It was a constant, low-grade fever in her blood, a frantic scrabbling against the walls of its cage. During the worst of the abuse, she could almost feel it, a phantom sensation of fur bristling and claws extending. But the memory of that first failed shift, the searing, bone-breaking agony of it, was a more powerful jailer than any physical chains. The terror of that pain, combined with the absolute need to remain hidden and silent, kept her wolf imprisoned. She survived by retreating into her memories. In the dead of night, nursing her fresh wounds, she would conjure the image of her father's booming laugh, the feel of her mother's hand on her cheek. She would remember their wolf forms running free, a blur of brown and white against the green of the forest. They were her strength, her reason. "I will survive," she would whisper into her thin pillow, the words a mantra, a prayer. "I promised you." She would not let Seraphina break her. She would endure. Chapter 5: The Breaking Point. The Alpha was returning. Thorn had been gone for 2 months, leading a campaign to eradicate a particularly vicious pack of rogues that had been terrorizing their southern territories. His imminent return sent a ripple of excitement through the fortress, but for Alara, it meant only one thing: Seraphina's cruelty would escalate. It was a predictable pattern. The Alpha's presence made Seraphina insecure, her jealousy a venomous, writhing thing. She needed to exert control, to prove her power, and Alara was her chosen outlet. The day of his return, the air in Seraphina's chambers was electric with her foul mood. She paced back and forth, a caged predator, finding fault with everything. The flowers were wilting, the air was stuffy, the gown Alara had laid out was the wrong shade of blue. "Are you trying to make me look like a common milkmaid?" Serafina shrieked, snatching the silk gown and ripping it from top to bottom. The sound of tearing fabric was like a gunshot in the silent room. She then grabbed the whip, a new acquisition, a thin, cruel-looking thing of braided leather. "You are an incompetent, worthless creature," she snarled, her face contorted with rage. "You exist only to serve me, and you cannot even do that right." The first lash cut across Alara's back, biting through the thin fabric of her dress. Pain, sharp and immediate, exploded through her. She gasped, stumbling forward. Another lash followed, and another. It was a frantic, mindless assault, fueled by years of pent-up jealousy and malice. But today, something was different. After 5 years of passive endurance, something inside Alara snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a primal, instinctual reaction. As Serafina raised the whip for another strike, Alara spun around, her hand shot out, impossibly fast, and caught Serafina's wrist in a grip of iron. The shock on Serafina's face was almost comical. She stared at the servant girl, this silent, broken thing who was now holding her, defying her. For a moment, they were frozen, a tableau of disbelief and rebellion. "Let go!" Serafina hissed, her voice trembling with fury. Alara didn't. Instead, with a surge of strength she didn't know she possessed, she shoved. Serafina, caught off balance, stumbled backward and fell to the floor in an undignified heap of torn silk and golden hair. The silence that followed was deafening. Alara stood, breathing heavily, her hand still tingling from the contact. She had done it. She had fought back. The dawning realization of her actions crashed down on her like a tidal wave. This was the end. Serafina's shock quickly morphed into cunning, malevolent glee. This was even better than a simple beating. This was an opportunity. She let out a piercing shriek, a sound of manufactured terror. "Help guards, she attacked me. The servant attacked me." With surprising speed, she scrambled to her feet, grabbed the letter opener from her desk, and drew a shallow, bloody line across her own arm. She then threw the whip into Alara's numb hands just as 2 guards burst through the door. The scene was damning. The consort, disheveled and bleeding, the torn dress on the floor, and the servant, Alara, standing over her, holding the very weapon of the alleged assault. "She went mad!" Serafina cried, pointing a trembling finger at Alara. "She attacked me. Take her away." The guards didn't hesitate. They seized Alara, her apathetic resistance doing little to stop them as they dragged her from the room. Her eyes met Serafina's. In them, she saw pure, triumphant evil. Triumphant. They threw her into the damp, cold darkness of the dungeons. The heavy stone door slammed shut, the sound echoing her doom. It was over. Her promise was broken. She had not survived. Lying on the cold stone floor, Alara felt a strange sense of peace. The fight was finished. All she had left was a single, final wish. She prayed that Greta would be safe. Chapter 6. The Alpha's Return. Thorn rode through the main gates of the Eldridge fortress, the weariness of the campaign settling deep into his bones. The victory over the rogues had been decisive, but costly. He craved a hot meal, a quiet moment, and the simple peace of his own territory. He was met not by peace, but by his beta, Ronan, whose face was a mask of grim concern. Ronan was a steady, loyal friend, a man of few words but sharp instincts. His presence told Thorn immediately that something was wrong. "Alpha," Ronan said, his voice low. "There's been an incident." Thorn dismounted, his storm-gray eyes narrowing. "What kind of incident?" "It's the consort. She claims her handmaiden attacked her. The girl is in the dungeons." Thorn's jaw tightened. He had long grown weary of Seraphina's dramatics, her constant need for attention and validation, an attack from a servant. It seemed unlikely, theatrical, but he was the Alpha. He had to see it through. He found Seraphina in their chambers, being tended to by a healer. She put on a masterful performance of a terrified victim, showing him the shallow cut on her arm, her voice trembling as she recounted a wild tale of Alara's unprovoked, violent madness. Thorn listened, his expression unreadable. He looked at the torn dress, the whip on the floor. Something felt wrong. The girl. He vaguely remembered her. Quiet, unassuming, eyes the color of jade. He remembered that one moment in the kitchen, years ago. There was no madness in those eyes. There was only a deep, profound sadness. "I want her executed at dawn," Seraphina demanded, her voice hardening. "An example must be made." "I will handle the judgment," Thorn said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to Ronan. "Bring me to the prisoner." The dungeons were cold and smelled of damp earth and despair. A single torch flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. Alara was huddled in a corner of the cell, small and still. When the door opened and the Alpha filled the doorway, she didn't flinch. She simply looked up, her expression one of resignation. Thorn's breath caught in his throat. In the flickering torchlight, he could see the dirt and tear tracks on her face, but it was her eyes that held him. There was no fear there, only a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "Alara, Alpha." "My consort claims you attacked her." Alara's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, Alpha." "Did you?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I pushed her. She was angry." Her simple, honest answer struck him more than any denial would have. He stepped closer, his keen eyes scanning her. The collar of her dress was torn, and beneath the tear, on the pale skin of her shoulder, he saw it. A thin, white, faded line, a scar, and another next to it. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that came not from him, but from the beast that lived within. His wolf, the primal core of his being, was stirring with a protective fury he hadn't felt in years. It recognized something. It smelled injustice. It smelled pain inflicted upon one who should have been protected. "Guards, leave us," he commanded, his voice a low thunder. When they were alone, he crouched down, his large frame seeming to shrink the small cell. "Show me your back," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Alara tensed. This was a violation she hadn't anticipated, but defying him was pointless. With trembling fingers, she turned and pulled the rough fabric of her dress aside, exposing a section of her back and shoulders. Thorn's blood ran cold. In the wavering light, her skin was a horrific tapestry of healed wounds, the thin, silvery lines of a whip, the round, puckered scars of burns, the faint crisscross of old cuts, a history of systematic torture, carefully hidden from the world. He felt a rage so pure and so potent it nearly brought him to his knees. The beast inside him roared, clawing for release, demanding vengeance for this silent, brutalized woman. Seraphina hadn't been the victim. She had been the monster. Alara let the dress fall back into place, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "I accept my punishment, Alpha," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I will not cause you any trouble. I only ask one thing. Please, let it be fire. Let me be cremated. I do not wish to be buried in the dark." Her quiet dignity, her acceptance of a death she didn't deserve, shattered the last of his composure. He stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "There will be no punishment," he growled, the sound vibrating through the stone floor, "but there will be justice." He turned and strode to the door, shouting for the guards. "Get the pack healer, bring her here, now," and place the prisoner under my personal protection. No one is to come near this cell without my direct command. No one." He looked back at Alara, at the flicker of confusion and disbelief in her jade eyes. For the first time in 5 years, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to take root in the barren wasteland of her heart. Chapter 7. Unveiling the Truth. Thorn didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, the fire crackling in the hearth, his mind a maelstrom of fury and self-recrimination. He, the Alpha, the protector of the Eldridge Pack, had allowed this to happen under his own roof. He had been blind, willingly so, choosing political stability over the well-being of his people. The thought was a poison in his veins. Ronan entered the study just before dawn, his face etched with grim purpose. "Anya is with her now," he reported. Anya was the pack's head healer, a wise, older woman with gentle hands and an unshakable demeanor, and I spoke with the girl, Alara. Thorn leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "What did she say?" "Everything," Ronan said, his voice heavy. He recounted the story Alara had told him, a quiet, factual litany of horrors that had begun the day Seraphina arrived. He spoke of the isolation, the constant fear, and the incident with Lyra, the maid who had disappeared. He told Thorn about Alara's past, the rogue attack that had killed her parents and locked her wolf away in a prison of trauma. The confirmation of her status as a blocked shifter sent another shockwave through Thorn. It explained her silence, her desire to remain invisible in their world. Such a condition was a mark of shame, often seen as a weakness. For Alara, it had been a vulnerability that Seraphina had exploited to its fullest, most sadistic extent. "I'm gathering more evidence," Ronan continued. "Greta, the head cook, is willing to testify. She's been tending to Alara's wounds in secret for years. She also told me about a guard she tried to warn, a man named Fendril, who was promptly sent to the northern border." "Find him," Thorn commanded. "Bring him back immediately." Anya arrived an hour later, her face pale. Alpha, her injuries, they are extensive, old and new. The stories she tells, her body confirms it. But it's more than that. She hesitated, her gaze meeting Thorn's. Her wolf is there. I can feel it. It's strong, but it's caged. The trauma of her parents' death created a psychological barrier so profound that she cannot break through it. The years of abuse have only reinforced the walls of that prison. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture of unimaginable cruelty and resilience. Thorn made a decision. "Move her," he ordered Ronan. "Take her out of the dungeons. Put her in the guest chambers in the east wing. Post 2 of my most trusted guards outside her door. She's no longer a prisoner. She is a protected witness." He paced the room, the controlled energy of his wolf radiating from him, "and we will begin a quiet investigation. I want every servant who has ever worked for Seraphina questioned. I want a message sent to the Shadow Veil Pack. Find me anyone who served her before she came here. This ends now." Later that morning, Alara found herself being led not to the executioner's block, but up a winding staircase to a part of the fortress she had only ever seen from a distance. The room she was given was larger than the cottage she'd grown up in, with a soft bed, a warm fire, and a window that looked out over the sprawling forest. It was terrifying. She was used to the dark, to small, confined spaces. The comfort felt like a trap, the kindness a trick. She stood in the center of the room, rigid with suspicion, expecting Seraphina to burst through the door at any moment. But the only person who came was Thorn. He entered quietly. Without the usual fanfare of his station, he didn't approach her, but stood by the door, giving her space. "You are safe here, Alara," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "No one will harm you." She just stared at him, her jade eyes wide and searching. She had been a ghost in his home for 6 years. He had never truly seen her. Now, he was looking at her as if she were the only person in the world, and in his storm-gray eyes, She saw something she had never expected to see directed at her. A fierce, unwavering vow of protection. Chapter 8. Building Trust. The days that followed were a strange, disorienting dream for Lyra. She was given new, simple clothes that didn't chafe or bind. Food was brought to her on a tray, warm and plentiful. The guards outside her door were silent sentinels, their presence a constant, reassuring weight. But true safety was a foreign concept, and her body remained coiled with tension, ready to flinch at any shadow. Thorn became a regular visitor. He never stayed long, and he always maintained a respectful distance, as if he understood she was a wild, wounded creature that would bolt at any sudden move. He didn't press her for details of her torment. Instead, he talked. He told her about his duties as Alpha, the weight of responsibility for so many lives. He spoke of the trade negotiations, the border patrols, the petty squabbles between pack members he was forced to mediate. He was showing her his world, piece by piece. One afternoon, he found her staring out the window at the distant tree line. "You missed the forest," he stated, his voice soft. She jumped, not having heard him enter. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "My father used to take me there," she finally whispered, the words feeling rusty from disuse. "He taught me the names of the trees." Thorn moved to stand beside her, his gaze also on the woods. The proximity of his large, warm body was both terrifying and strangely comforting. The air between them crackled with an energy she didn't understand. "Tell me about them," he prompted gently. And so, she did. She spoke of her parents for the first time in years, not of their deaths, but of their lives. She told him about her mother's songs and her father's laughter. As she spoke, a small, tight knot of grief in her chest began to loosen. He listened, his silence a deep and absorbing thing, his gray eyes never leaving her face. He was not just hearing her words, he was bearing witness to her pain. The trust between them began as a fragile thread, but it strengthened with each quiet conversation. Anya, the healer, also became a part of her new routine. Her sessions with Lyra were not about physical wounds, but the invisible ones. "Your wolf is a part of you, Lyra," Anya explained one day, her voice calm and soothing. "She is not your enemy. She is your strength, locked away by fear. We need to help you find the key." Their first attempt was in the quiet of Lyra's new room. Anya guided her through a meditation, urging her to reach inward, to call to the beast within. Lyra tried. She closed her eyes and focused, but as she neared the edge of that dark internal prison, the memory of the failed shift, of the blinding pain and the sound of her mother's scream, rose up like a tidal wave. She gasped, her body drenched in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled back, shaking. "I can't," she choked out, tears of frustration blurring her vision. "I can't." Thorn entered just then, having heard her cry of distress. He saw her curled on the floor, trembling, and his protective instincts roared to life. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt before her, his large hands hovering in the air, wanting to comfort her but afraid his touch would be too much. "It's all right," he murmured, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. "It's all right, you are safe." His presence, his scent of pine and rain and strength, was an anchor in her storm of panic. She looked up at him, her tear-filled jade eyes meeting his stormy gray ones. In that moment, a connection, ancient and profound, arced between them. It was more than sympathy, more than a protector and his charge. It was the first faint whisper of the mate bond, a pull of one soul to another that neither of them yet understood. But their fragile new world was not without its threats. Thorn's investigation into his own consort was a political powder keg. One of the pack elders, a stern, traditionalist wolf named Draven, confronted Thorn in the council chambers. "Alpha, this is madness," Draven argued, his voice stern. "You are taking the word of a servant, a broken one. At that against your own mate, the daughter of Alpha Elias. You risk war for a girl's fantasies. Thorn's eyes turned to chips of ice. The girl's fantasies are carved into her skin. Draven. He snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. I will have the truth, and if Elias values his alliance, he will help me find it. The honor of this pack is not for sale. The confrontation served as a stark reminder. The truth would not be enough. They needed undeniable proof, or Seraphina's web of lies would strangle them all. Chapter 9, Storm of Memories. A storm rolled in from the west, the sky turning a bruised purple gray. The wind howled around the stone fortress, rattling the window panes in Alara's room. The sound was a key, unlocking a door in her mind she had kept bolted for years. The rain, the wind, the encroaching darkness, it was the same. The night her parents were torn from her. She was suddenly 14 again, cowering in the corner of her cottage. The smell of blood and wet fur filled her nostrils. The sound of snarling echoed in her ears. A wave of uncontrollable shaking seized her body. The room around her dissolved, replaced by the flickering firelight and the terrifying shadows of that fateful night. She didn't scream. Her trauma was a silent one. She simply curled into a tight ball on the floor, her arms wrapped around her head, lost in a waking nightmare. Thorn found her like that. The guards had alerted him to her distress. He entered the room and saw her, not as the composed young woman she was becoming, but as the broken child from the forest. His heart clenched. He didn't try to touch her. He just sat on the floor a few feet away, making his presence known. Alara, he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of her memories. You're not there. You're here. You're in the fortress. You are safe. His words barely penetrated the fog. He knew he had to pull her out, to ground her in the present. He began to talk, his voice a continuous, soothing rumble. He didn't talk about her pain. He talked about his own. He told her about his own childhood, about the immense pressure of being the Alpha's son. He described his first shift, the overwhelming mix of pain and exhilaration. He spoke of his own mother, who had died of a fever when he was just a boy, and the loneliness that had followed. He shared pieces of himself, offering his own vulnerabilities as a bridge back to reality. Slowly, gradually, the rhythm of his voice began to cut through the noise in her head. The image of the cottage faded. The sounds of the fight receded. She became aware of the solid floor beneath her, the scent of pine and rain that was uniquely Thorn. She uncurled, her body still trembling, and looked at him. He was watching her with an expression of such profound tenderness and concern that it made her ache. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Never apologize for your pain, he said, his voice thick with emotion. An unspoken understanding passed between them. They were two lonely souls who had found a strange sort of solace in one another's company. The air between them was thick with things unsaid, with a magnetic pull that was growing harder and harder to ignore. Thorn knew he should leave, that he was blurring lines and Alpha should not cross with a witness under his protection. But the thought of leaving her alone in the dark was unbearable. He stayed, sitting in silence, a steadfast guardian against the ghosts of her past, until the storm outside, and the one inside her, finally passed. Meanwhile, Ronan's investigation was bearing fruit. Fendril, the guard who had been sent to the northern border, was brought back. He was grim-faced and hardened by his time in the desolate outpost, and he was angry. He told Ronan and Thorn exactly what Greta had said to him years ago, and how, days later. He was given a near-suicidal new assignment by an order that came directly from the consort's office. The final piece of the puzzle arrived via a weary messenger from the Shadow Veil Pack. Thorn's request for information had been met with resistance by Alpha Elias, but one of Seraphina's former handmaidens, a woman now married and living in a remote village, had come forward. Her story was chillingly familiar, the petty cruelties, the sudden rages, the small, hidden injuries. She had left Seraphina's service after a hot comb was accidentally dropped on her foot, scarring her for life. Thorn held the woman's written testimony in his hand. He now had the proof he needed. He had witnesses. He had a pattern of behavior. He had the truth. The time for quiet investigation was over. It was time for a confrontation. Chapter 10. The Poison Plot. Seraphina was no fool. She felt the shift in the fortress's atmosphere. The sympathetic glances from the servants had been replaced by whispers and averted eyes. The guards Thorn had assigned to her were polite, but their watchfulness had a new, steely edge. She was being observed, and she knew it. Her initial fury at being defied gave way to a cold, calculating panic. She knew Lyra was alive and, worse, protected. She knew Thorn was digging into her past. She had to act, to reclaim control of the narrative, to paint herself as the ultimate victim. Her plan was both audacious and desperate. She sent one of her few remaining loyalists, a sycophantic lady-in-waiting, to the city to procure 2 vials from a back-alley apothecary. One contained a fast-acting but non-lethal poison that would induce violent sickness. The other contained the antidote. She would poison herself. She would make it look as if Lyra, through some unknown accomplice, had made an attempt on her life, a final, desperate act of revenge. It would be the perfect, tragic culmination of her story. But Thorn, guided by his own sharp instincts and Ronan's intelligence network, anticipated her move. They had been monitoring her loyalists' movements. When the woman returned with the vials, Ronan was watching. "She's going to make a move," Ronan told Thorn, his voice grim, likely at a public meal, for maximum effect. "Then we will set a stage of our own," Thorn replied, a dangerous light in his eyes. That evening, Thorn called an emergency assembly of the pack elders and high-ranking members in the Great Hall. He announced it as a matter of urgent pack security. Seraphina was, by custom, required to be there, seated beside him. Lyra, at Thorn's insistence, was also present, standing quietly near the back of the hall with Anya and 2 guards. Her presence caused a stir of murmurs and confused glances. The tension in the hall was a palpable thing. Seraphina, dressed in a gown of virginal white, looked pale and fragile. As a servant poured her a glass of wine, she performed a subtle sleight of hand, her fingers brushing the rim of the goblet, adding the clear, odorless poison. She took a small, delicate sip. Thorn began to speak, his voice resonating with power. "I have called you here tonight to address a rot that has festered within this pack for too long, a rot of deceit and cruelty." As he spoke, Seraphina's performance began. Her hand went to her throat. She coughed, a delicate, theatrical sound. Her eyes widened in feigned alarm. "My lord, the wine," she gasped, slumping in her chair. I feel ill." Several elders stood in alarm. Her lady-in-waiting rushed to her side, crying out, "She's been poisoned." But Thorn didn't move. He simply watched her, his expression cold as granite. "Indeed," he said, his voice cutting through the rising panic, "poisoned by her own hand." At his signal, Ronan stepped forward. "We have a witness who saw the consort's lady-in-waiting purchase this from an apothecary this afternoon." He held up a small vial identical to the one Seraphina had used, a poison, and this. He held up the second vial, the antidote. Seraphina's eyes flew open, the act of a dying woman momentarily forgotten. This was not how it was supposed to go. Thorn rose to his full, intimidating height. "Theatrics are over. Seraphina," he turned to the assembled crowd, "for 5 years, my consort has systematically tortured a member of this pack, a servant girl she chose out of jealousy." He gestured toward the back of the hall. "Lyra." All eyes turned to Lyra. She stood tall, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but she did not flinch under their stares. Thorn laid out the evidence with cold, brutal precision. He presented the testimony from the former handmaiden in Shadowvale. He called Fendril forward to tell his story. He had Greta describe the wounds she had treated in secret for years. Finally, he had Anya give her medical assessment of the scars that covered Alara's body. The hall was utterly silent, the pack members staring at Seraphina in dawning horror. The beautiful, regal consort was a monster. Thorn turned his furious, storm-gray eyes on his wife. "You did all of this. Why?" Stripped of her lies, her plan in ruins. The last of Seraphina's composure crumbled. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Because of you!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. She pointed a trembling finger at him. "It was that day in the kitchen, the day I arrived. You looked at her. You saw her. For 3 seconds, you looked at that pathetic, filthy servant as if she mattered more than me, your future bride. I saw it. I saw everything." Her confession, born of pure, venomous jealousy over a 3-second glance years ago, hung in the air, damning and absolute. The motivation was so petty, so profoundly narcissistic, that it was more shocking than any calculated political plot could ever be. Alpha Elias of Shadowvale, who had been summoned for the assembly, stood up, his face ashen. He saw the cold fury in Thorn's eyes, the disgust on the faces of the Eldridge elders. He saw the prospect of a bloody, honorless war over his daughter's sadism. He made the only choice he could. "She is no longer my daughter," Elias announced, his voice booming with grim finality. "The Shadowvale Pack disowns her. Her actions have brought shame upon us all. She is yours to judge. Alpha Thorn." He had abandoned her. Seraphina stared at her father, her mouth agape in disbelief, and then she finally, truly, broke. Chapter 11. Banishment and Freedom. The judgment was swift. Thorn stood before the assembled pack, his voice ringing with the absolute authority of the Alpha. "Seraphina of Shadowvale, for your crimes against a member of this pack, for your deceit, and for the dishonor you have brought upon this hall, you are hereby stripped of your title. Our union is annulled. You are banished from the Eldridge lands, to walk as a rogue for the rest of your days. If you are ever seen here again, you will be hunted down and killed without mercy." Seraphina, her face a mess of tears and fury, was dragged away by the guards, her screams and curses echoing through the great hall until they faded into silence. The nightmare was over. A strange, ringing silence filled the hall. Then, Alara felt it, the weight of 5 years of constant, grinding fear lifted from her shoulders, the hypervigilance, the tension that had been her constant companion, simply evaporated. Her knees buckled. Thorn was there before she hit the floor. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing, his movements sure and protective. He ignored the stunned looks of his pack elders and carried her from the hall, away from the prying eyes, the whispers, the suffocating weight of the crowd. He took her to the quiet solitude of his study and gently set her down in a large armchair by the fire. She began to shake, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, terrifying shock of release. Sobs racked her body, raw and uninhibited, the sound of years of unshed tears finally breaking free. Thorn didn't say a word. He simply knelt before her, his presence a solid, unwavering wall of support. He let her cry until she was exhausted, until the storm had passed, leaving a quiet, fragile calm in its wake. "It's over," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "You're free, Alara." Free. The word was so large, so foreign, she couldn't quite grasp it. In the weeks that followed, Alara began to discover what freedom meant. It meant walking through the fortress without her head bowed, without fear. It meant speaking when she wanted to, her voice growing stronger and more confident each day. It meant trading her drab servant's clothes for simple, comfortable tunics and leggings. Ronan began to teach her self-defense. At first, she was hesitant, her body still programmed to be small and non-threatening, but Ronan was a patient teacher. He showed her how to use her body's natural leverage, how to turn an attacker's momentum against them. With each lesson, she felt a new sense of power blooming within her, a feeling of control over her own physical self that she had never known. Thorn ensured her physical healing continued. Anya worked with her daily, using salves to fade the worst of her scars and tonics to rebuild her strength. But the true healing was happening on a deeper level. Thorn and Alara spent more and more time together. They walked the castle battlements in the cool evenings, talking for hours. She learned about the complexities of his leadership, and he learned about the simple, profound wisdom she had gained from her quiet observation of the world. He found himself drawn not just to her resilience, but to her sharp mind and her gentle, compassionate heart. The pull between them was now an undeniable force, a current of electricity that charged the air whenever they were near. A lingering touch of his hand on her arm as he helped her over a loose stone sent a jolt through her entire body. A shared laugh would leave them both breathless, their eyes locked in a gaze that said more than words ever could. It was a slow, tentative dance of two wounded souls learning to trust again, finding in each other a reflection of their own loneliness and a promise of something more. One evening, as they stood watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors, he reached out and gently traced the line of a faded scar on her forearm, the very first one Serafina had given her. His touch was not one of pity, but of reverence. "She tried to erase you," he murmured, his voice a low, rough whisper. "Instead, she revealed the strongest person I have ever known." His storm-gray eyes were dark with emotion, and Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. In that moment, she knew she was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to live, and for the first time, she dared to imagine a future that wasn't defined by the shadows of her past. Chapter 12. Awakening the Wolf. The final wall in Alara's prison was the one she had built around her own wolf. Despite the newfound safety and her growing confidence, the trauma of that first failed shift remained a potent, terrifying barrier. "We have to try again," Anya said one afternoon, her expression gentle but firm. "Your wolf has been silent for too long. She is the other half of your soul, Alara. You cannot be whole without her." This time, they didn't stay within the stone walls of the fortress. Thorn led them to a secluded meadow deep within the pack's territory, a place ringed by ancient oaks and carpeted with wildflowers. The air was clean and vibrant, alive with the hum of insects and the scent of damp earth. "Your parents were of the forest," Thorn said, his voice a low rumble beside her. "Perhaps this is where you need to be to find your wolf." Alara was terrified. Her hands were cold, her breathing shallow. Anya began the familiar guided meditation, her voice a soothing drone, but the old panic began to rise, cold and suffocating. "I can't," she gasped, her eyes flying open, the pain. Thorn knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his large, warm ones. The contact was electric, a current of pure, grounding energy. "Don't think about the pain," he said, his gray eyes locking onto hers, holding her captive. "Don't think about that night. Think about the good memories. Think about your mother's song. Think about your father teaching you how to track. Remember the love, Alara, not the loss. The love is what connects you to her." His words were the key. She closed her eyes, and instead of pushing toward the dark place, she let herself fall back into the warmth of her past. She saw her mother's smiling face, heard her low, humming lullaby. She felt the comforting weight of her father's hand on her shoulder as he pointed out a fox track. She remembered the pure, unadulterated joy of running through the trees, dreaming of the day she would do it on 4 paws instead of 2. Love. It was a fire, warm and bright, and it began to burn away the shadows of her fear. Deep inside her, the wolf stirred. It wasn't the frantic, desperate clawing of a prisoner. It was a slow, powerful stretching, an awakening. The barrier of trauma, so solid for so long, began to crack. A fissure of light broke through. A new sensation, one she had never felt before, flooded her. It was a jolt of raw power, a connection to the earth beneath her, the sky above her. Her senses exploded. She could smell every flower in the meadow, every leaf on the trees. She could hear the beat of a rabbit's heart 100 yards away. A cry, half human, half animal, tore from her throat. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a cry of pure, ecstatic release. She felt a tingling in her hands, and when she looked down, her fingernails were elongating, thickening into dark, sharp claws. A shimmer of dark fur began to creep up her arms. The shift wasn't complete, but it had started. It was real. Thorn watched, his breath caught in his chest, a look of utter awe on his face, as the power of her awakening wolf washed over him. Another, more profound realization slammed into him with the force of a physical blow, the scent of her wildflowers and ozone and something uniquely. Primally, hers was suddenly the most intoxicating thing he had ever smelled. His own wolf rose to the surface, not with rage, but with a deep, soul-shaking recognition. Mate. The word echoed in the deepest part of his being. Not Seraphina, the political bride he had endured, not any of the other women he had known. It was Lyra, the quiet servant, the resilient survivor, the magnificent, awakening wolf. She was his other half, his true mate, the one the moon goddess had chosen for him. At that exact moment, as if sensing the monumental shift in their world, a new scent cut through the air, blood, smoke, and the foul stench of unknown wolves. Alara's head snapped up, her jade eyes, now tinged with a feral golden light, narrowed. Danger, she rasped, the word a low growl. They're coming. From the south. Her newly awakened senses were a warning bell, more acute and faster than any of his trained sentries. An attack. Thorn didn't hesitate. He let his own shift take him, the change a seamless, powerful explosion of muscle and fur. In his place stood a massive black wolf, its gray eyes burning with intelligent fury. He let out a single, booming howl, a call to arms that would be heard all the way back at the fortress. Ronan and the other guards shifted, their own wolves appearing beside their alpha. But before they could move, a dozen rough-looking men mercenaries, not shifters, burst from the tree line, armed with silver-laced blades. Behind them was a gaunt, wild-eyed figure, Seraphina, banished, but not defeated. "Kill the Alpha," she shrieked, her voice crazed. "But bring me the girl. I want to finish what I started." The mercenaries charged. Thorn and his wolves met them head-on, a whirlwind of black and gray fur, teeth, and claws. But they were outnumbered. One of the mercenaries broke through the line, his eyes fixed on Lyra. He lunged, his silver knife flashing. Instinct took over. Lyra didn't run. She didn't cower. She met his attack. Using the moves Ronan had taught her, she sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and used his own momentum to throw him to the ground before he could recover. She brought her hand down her hand with its half-formed claws and raked it across his face. He howled in pain and scrambled away. Her single act of defiance, her courage, turned the tide. It gave Thorn the opening he needed. He took down 2 more men with savage efficiency, the remaining mercenaries. Seeing their companions fall, and their leader, Seraphina, already melting back into the shadows, lost their nerve and fled. Silence descended on the meadow once more, broken only by the sound of heavy panting. The pack warriors who had answered Thorn's call arrived to find their alpha, in his human form once more, standing over a victorious but trembling Lyra. The pack stared at the scene, the defeated mercenaries, the half-shifted girl, and the look of fierce, possessive pride in their alpha's eyes. In that moment, everything changed. Alara was no longer the broken servant. She was a warrior, a survivor who had just helped save their Alpha. She had earned their respect, not with a title, but with her own strength. And Thorn knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not, would not, live another day without her by his side. Chapter 13: The Mating Ceremony. The next evening, Thorn stood before his entire pack in the great hall, the hearth fires casting a warm, golden glow on their assembled faces. Alara stood beside him, not behind him, her hand held firmly and protectively in his. The whispers had been flying all day, but now. A hush fell over the crowd. "Yesterday," Thorn began, his voice clear and strong, "Alara saved my life. For years, she has shown a strength and resilience that few of us could comprehend. Her wolf, long silenced by trauma, is awakening, and my own." He paused, his storm-gray eyes finding Alara's, has recognized its other half. A collective gasp went through the hall. "Alara is my true mate," he declared, the words ringing with absolute conviction, "and I would ask her, before all of you, to be my Luna, my mate, for all of eternity." He turned to her, his gaze softening, all his love and reverence laid bare for her to see. He wasn't the Alpha in that moment. He was just a male, asking for the heart of the female he was destined for. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but they were tears of joy. This future, so wild and impossible just weeks ago, was real. "Yes," she breathed, the word full of all her hopes. "Yes, Thorn." The pack erupted in a roar of approval. The broken servant was gone. In her place stood their future Luna. The mating ceremony was held that night, under the light of a full, silver moon in the same sacred meadow where her wolf had reawakened. The air was cool and smelled of night-blooming jasmine. Dressed in a simple white gown, Alara stood opposite Thorn, who wore traditional black leather. The pack formed a silent, respectful circle around them, following ancient tradition. Thorn spoke the vows first. "I, Thorn, Alpha of the Eldridge Pack, take you. Alara, as my mate, my heart is yours, my strength is your shield, my life is your own. Before the goddess, I am yours." Then it was her turn. Her voice, though soft, did not tremble. "I, Alara, of the Eldridge Pack, take you, Thorn, as my mate. My heart is yours. My loyalty is your strength. My life is your own. Before the goddess, I am yours." The final act was the mating bite, the physical sealing of their bond. Thorn lowered his head, his lips brushing the sensitive skin where her neck met her shoulder. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze asking for final permission. She gave a slight, trusting nod. His teeth, now slightly elongated with the proximity of his wolf, sank into her flesh. It was not a savage act. It was a searing, possessive mark, a jolt of pure energy, hot and white, shot through her, lighting up every nerve ending. It was pain and pleasure, possession and surrender, all at once, through the bond that snapped into place. She felt his love, his devotion, his vow of protection, pour into her. When he pulled back, he offered her his own neck, with a new primal confidence. She rose on her toes and marked him in return, claiming him as he had claimed her. The bond settled, a warm, humming connection that now linked their souls for eternity. At that moment, the last of the walls around her wolf crumbled. A wave of power, glorious and unrestrained, surged through her. She fell to her knees as the full transformation finally took her. It was not the agonizing, tearing pain of her first attempt. It was a clean, hot fire, a seamless unfolding of what was always meant to be. Where she had knelt, a wolf now stood. She was not large, but sleek and powerful, her fur the color of midnight, her eyes the same startling jade green. She was beautiful, and she was free. Thorn's own black wolf appeared beside her, and together, they lifted their heads to the moon and howled, a song of love and homecoming that echoed through the forest. Later, back in the Alpha's chambers, the scent of them mate filled the air. The primal energy of the ceremony still hummed in their blood. Thorn led her to the bedroom, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes dark with a hunger that was tempered by a deep, reverent tenderness. Alara was nervous. Her body, a landscape of scars, had only ever known pain from another's touch. She trembled slightly as he reached for the laces of her gown. He saw her fear, and his hand stilled. "Alara," he murmured, his voice a low, rough vibration against her skin. "We do nothing you are not ready for. Tonight is about you, about your healing. Just tell me what you want." His patience, his willingness to give her all the control, was the most profound act of love she had ever known. It unraveled the last of her fear. "I want you," she whispered, her voice full of a longing that had been buried for years. "I trust you, Thorn." His touch was a question, a gentle exploration. His fingers traced the faded scars on her back, not with pity, but with a kind of worship, as if he were mapping the constellations of her survival. He kissed each mark, his lips a soft, healing balm, murmuring words of praise for her strength, for her spirit. He was not just making love to her body, he was loving the history that had brought her to him. He laid her down on the soft furs of the bed, his body covering hers, a warm, protective weight. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and achingly gentle. He watched her face, his gaze intense, reading every flicker of emotion in her eyes. When he finally entered her, it was with a reverence that made her gasp. It was a quiet undoing of every pain she had ever known, a gentle reclaiming of her own body. This was not the taking she had feared, but a giving, a sharing. Through the mate bond, their emotions flowed back and forth, his overwhelming love and adoration, her profound gratitude and dawning joy. It was more than a physical union. It was the final, healing fusion of two broken souls, made whole in their love for one another, as pleasure, pure and untainted, finally crested through her. She cried out his name, a sound of pure, unadulterated freedom, curled in his arms afterward, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She felt a peace so deep and absolute. She knew she was finally home. Chapter 14, New Beginnings. 6 months later, the Alara who had once been a ghost in the fortress was a distant memory. Luna Alara moved with a quiet confidence that was more commanding than any loud decree. Her strength was not in aggression, but in a deep, unshakable empathy that resonated with the pack. She didn't forget where she came from. Her first official act as Luna was to establish a new set of laws protecting the pack's servants and workers. She created a system for grievances to be heard without fear of retribution, ensuring that no one would ever have to suffer in silence as she had. She took a special interest in the Omegas, the lowest-ranking members of the pack, making sure they were treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. She found her true calling in diplomacy. Pack delegations from neighboring territories, who arrived expecting a fierce, battle-hardened Luna, were often disarmed by her intelligence and her ability to listen. She could see the heart of a conflict, the unspoken fears and desires beneath the posturing, and she often forged alliances where Thorn's more direct, alpha nature might have met with resistance. Her bond with Thorn deepened with each passing day. They were rarely apart, a true partnership in leadership and in life. They often ran together in their wolf forms, a flash of midnight and shadow, a silent, perfect communication passing between them as they raced through the forest of their youth. One crisp autumn morning, Anya came to see her, a knowing smile on her face. Alara had been feeling tired, her senses heightened in a way they hadn't been since her first awakening. "Congratulations, Luna," Anya said, her eyes twinkling. "You are with child." The news filled Alara with a joy so fierce it stole her breath. A child, a new life, born not of pain and survival, but of love and hope. When she told Thorn, he lifted her off the ground, his face alight with a happiness so pure it brought tears to her eyes. He held her, his hand resting protectively over her still, flat stomach, and she felt the overwhelming love for their unborn child flow from him through their bond. But even in their happiness, old politics still cast a shadow. Draven, the elder who had initially opposed Thorn's investigation, remained a skeptic. He saw Alara's compassionate reforms as a sign of weakness, a departure from the Pack's warrior traditions. He chose to challenge her during a Pack Council meeting, while Thorn was away settling a border dispute. "Luna," Draven said, his voice laced with condescension, "your new laws are making this Pack soft. We are warriors, not nursemaids. What does a former servant know of the strength needed to lead?" The council chamber fell silent. All eyes were on Alara. In the past, such a direct challenge would have made her shrink into herself, but she was not that girl anymore. She stood, her posture regal, and met his gaze without flinching. "You are right, Elder Draven," she said, her voice calm and clear, ringing through the hall. "I was a servant. I know what it is to be powerless. I know what it is to be overlooked, and I know that a pack is like a wolf. It is only as strong as its most vulnerable part. A warrior with a festering wound is no warrior at all. By healing the hurts within our own pack, by ensuring every member feels valued and protected, we do not become soft, we become unbreakable." Her wisdom, spoken with such quiet, unshakable conviction, left Draven speechless. The other elders nodded in agreement, a murmur of support rippling through the room. She had not met his aggression with her own, but with a truth he could not deny. She had proven, once again, that her strength was a different kind, but no less powerful than any alpha's roar. When Thorn returned, Ronan met him with a wide grin. "Your Luna handled Elder Draven today," he said. "Didn't even raise her voice. She has the heart of a Luna and the mind of an alpha." Thorn looked across the courtyard and saw Alara, talking with Greta, her hand resting on her belly. A wave of love and pride washed over him. She was his mate, his Luna, the mother of his heir. She was the anchor of his soul and the future of their pack. Chapter 15, Legacy of Strength. Years passed, a peaceful and prosperous time for the Eldridge pack. The fortress was no longer just a place of strength, but one of justice and compassion. Alara's reforms had taken root, creating a loyalty and unity among the pack that was the envy of other territories. News of Seraphina would occasionally drift back to them, stories of a half-mad rogue wolf with cold blue eyes, seen on the edges of the wild lands, a bitter, lonely ghost haunting the world she had been cast out of. Thorn and Alara never spoke of her. She was a closed chapter, a scar that had long since faded. Their son, Alden, named for the grandfather he would never know, grew strong and kind, with his father's stormy eyes and his mother's compassionate heart. Alara taught him the names of the trees and the stories of the moon goddess, just as her mother had taught her. Thorn taught him how to lead, not just with dominance, but with honor. One evening, as twilight settled over the forest, painting the sky in shades of lavender and rose, Alara stood on the battlements, watching Alden, now a young boy, play-fighting with other pack children in the courtyard below. He was laughing, his joy a bright, beautiful sound. Thorn came to stand behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their son, their legacy. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "The beginning." Alara leaned back against his solid chest, her hand covering his. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I remember the fear, the pain." She turned in his arms to face him, her jade eyes clear and full of a love that had only deepened with time, but mostly. I remember a 3-second glance in a kitchen, a glance that changed everything. He smiled, a slow, warm curve of his lips. "I saw your eyes," he murmured, his thumb stroking her cheek. I didn't know it then, but my wolf did. He saw his home. She thought of her journey from the terrified orphan to the invisible servant, the tortured victim to the respected Luna. She thought of the promise she had made to her mother, whispered in the ruins of her childhood, survive. She had done more than survive. She had healed, she had loved, she had built a new life, a new family, a new legacy. She would teach her son about survival, yes, but she would also teach him about resilience, about justice, and above all, about the incredible, transformative power of love. "Come," she whispered, a playful, feral light entering her eyes. "The moon is rising. The forest is calling." He grinned, the alpha's solemn mask falling away to reveal the male who loved her, together. They made their way from the fortress walls, and as the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, 2 wolves, one of pure black and one of midnight, burst from the tree line. They ran side by side, their paws silent on the damp earth, their spirits intertwined, forever free, forever home.